So we have another major shift in the Benson magazine ban case dealing with DC's ban on magazines that hold more than 10 rounds, and this is a big development on how this case is currently going to move forward. As you may be aware that we've talked about in the past, the full court, the DC Court of Appeals, has officially stepped in and agreed to rehear the case en banc. That means that the full court is now taking control of the case, and even more importantly, the prior decision striking down DC's magazine ban has now been blocked. But now we have another development layered on top of that. The parties are now asking the court here to slow the case down temporarily and wait for the Supreme Court to issue their rulings in two current cases that are pending in front of them that deal directly with the Second Amendment. So this is an important development that is now tying directly some Supreme Court cases to the outcome of Benson. So let's talk about what is happening. Now, before we jump into this video, if you want to support the channel, one of the best ways to do that is simply to subscribe. You can also hit the like button that just tells the algorithm that you appreciate this content, and so it shares it with more people. I also want to thank one of the main supporters of this channel, which is Attorneys on Retainer. When it comes to self-defense protection, in my opinion, AOR is in a league of their own. They're backed by an actual law firm, the Attorneys for Freedom, and they're always trying to expand upon their benefits to give you as much as possible as a member. They've added a ton of new benefits that you can check out on their website, but also right now for the United States anniversary, they're doing an additional promo code. So if you sign up using my code ARMEDSCHOLAR, you can get $50 off of your individual sign-up fee or $25 off of your family fee. Now, as I mentioned in the intro, we have an important update in the Benson magazine ban case that's coming out of DC. So first, quickly, let's recap what happened in Benson because it's critical to understand everything that is now happening at the en banc panel level. The DC Court of Appeals originally ruled that the district's magazine ban, the ban on magazines that hold more than 10 rounds, does in fact violate the Second Amendment. Not only did the court strike down the ban itself, but it also vacated multiple related convictions tied to that ban for this individual, Tyree Benson. This included the possession of an unregistered firearm, the unlawful possession of ammunition, and carrying a firearm without a license. The court there said that those convictions were infected by the unconstitutional ban on magazines. So that was a sweeping ruling with major consequences. And ever since then, and ever since that ruling, DC has been trying to contain that impact. After losing, DC filed a petition for a rehearing en banc and tried to fast-track review of this case and also limit the impact of the ruling. Immediately, they sought for expedited review from the en banc panel. They also sought to block the impact of that ruling immediately, but that was denied initially. But then we also saw the United States and the Trump DOJ actually step in and argue that the en banc panel should take review of this case and deal directly with the remedy of this case that was granted by the lower court because they found an issue with that remedy. It's likely that that additional support from the United States government actually pushed the en banc panel to review this case, and now they've officially granted review to the case, and that effort to get the decision blocked temporarily and to get en banc review in this case has essentially succeeded. The DC Court of Appeals has officially granted a rehearing en banc in this case, and that's critical because now the court has granted that review and it wipes out that prior panel ruling. So that prior, pro two-way decision that we got blocking the magazine ban has now itself been blocked. So what that means in plain terms is that the ruling striking down the magazine ban is no longer controlling law. The prior decision has no precedential effect, and the case is now being reconsidered by the full court. This was essentially what we did not want to happen because now that strong ruling is effectively paused and it was being cited in a lot of other pro 2A cases, but now that's being blocked and all these other anti-gun states and jurisdictions are saying, see, this case is no longer binding. But now we have a new twist in this Benson case. The appellant, so Tyree Benson in this case, is now asking for the en banc panel to essentially give him a 60-day extension to file his en banc panel brief. And the reason he gave is very critical. He told the court that the briefing here would be more useful if they could incorporate upcoming Supreme Court rulings. Specifically, he points to two cases, which are Woolford versus Lopez, the Hawaii concealed carry case, and the U.S. versus Hamani case, which deals with prohibited people and the use of marijuana in the possession of firearms. Both of these cases deal directly with how courts are supposed to apply the Second Amendment under the recent Bruin analysis. In Woolford, the Supreme Court is looking at whether states can restrict carrying on private property that is open to the public unless the owner gives express consent. And in the Hamani case, the court is looking at whether the federal ban on firearms possession by unlawful users of controlled substances is constitutional. So while these are very different factual scenarios and cases, they both go directly to how the court will apply the Bruin framework going forward, and it will impact the exact framework that is going to be used to rule in the Benson case. So what Benson is saying in his new request is that let's wait for the Supreme Court to clarify this law first, because whatever the Supreme Court says in those decisions could directly impact how the en banc panel will analyze this issue revolving around magazine bans in DC. And this timeline also very much matters because the Supreme Court is expected to issue those decisions and those rulings by the end of this term, which will be either late June or early July. So we will get those rulings, here within just a few months. And the appellant here, Tyree Benson, is asking for an extension until July 20th, which would be after we get those rulings at the very latest. He would have time to review those and then issue his brief in this case, arguing why those cases impact what is going on in DC. So this is a big deal for a couple of reasons. First, it shows that even the parties recognize this law is still evolving and they don't want to brief this case under potentially outdated Second Amendment standards. Second, this does actually delay the case, but that is potentially a good thing because if briefing moved forward before the Supreme Court rules in those cases, the parties would eventually have to go back and modify their briefs anyway. So it's better to just hold it off now. You kind of just do it once, be done once, and look at what the Supreme Court says after those decisions are issued at the end of this term. And finally, it confirms that the Supreme Court is about to play a major role in shaping how these types of cases are reviewed, how they're decided, and how they move forward. So where does this leave us with this Benson case? Well, the case will now be heard by the full court, by the full DC Court of Appeals, and the court has already indicated that this will be a full reconsideration of whether the magazine ban is constitutional and whether that prior remedy was appropriate. But now the analysis may be guided by fresh Supreme Court rulings. So instead of this case being finalized, it is now delayed, reset, and kind of tied directly to what the Supreme Court will do in those two critical cases. So the Benson case just took another major turn. Not only was the original ruling kind of wiped out, and now the entire case may be delayed until the Supreme Court issues those two critical rulings and gives that additional guidance for two-way cases. And that means that this fight over magazine bans is far from over and may be directly impacted by what happens this term at the Supreme Court. So that's what's currently going on in the Benson magazine ban case. Like I said, that delay has been requested and they're pointing directly to those Supreme Court cases, saying that how the Supreme Court reviews those issues, analyzes the Second Amendment, and reapplies Bruin will impact how they want to handle their case. So as we get more information, as it develops more, I will let you guys know. If you like this video and you'd like to support the channel, one of the best ways to do that is simply to like, comment, and subscribe. All of those things help to fuel the algorithm and just tells the algorithm that you appreciate this type of content, and so it shares it with more people. But as always, thank you so much for all of your support. And never forget, this nation was built by armed scholars, and this nation will be maintained by armed scholars.